On the 15th of September 2007, a full-time vet who played a little bit of rugby on the side scored a try against the All Blacks. Commentators may occasionally suggest they're interchangeable, but there's a big difference between iconic and greatest. Whilst the annals of Rugby World Cup greats are lined with endless All Blacks and Springboks who did things nobody else ever could, the list of the competition's most iconic moments is not just very different, but more democratic and perhaps a tiny touch more fun. We're talking Becca Sicolari's try to draw level against maybe the greatest team of all time. Uruguay's passion proving it's always more than a match for any amount of talent. Al Sharon's Canada making the quarter-finals. The day Wales were glad they didn't play the whole of Samoa, and the day they wished they didn't play any of Fiji. And standing proud on that list is every single time in the 2007 Rugby World Cup that Portugal lined up to sing their anthem. But now, 16 years on from Rui Cordeiro's 90-metre solo effort, of which his namesake Santiago will be proud, his countrymen are back, ready to make crying contagious at rugby's biggest stage once again as it prepares to hear our Portuguesa once more, because for just the second time in their history, Portugal have qualified for the Rugby World Cup. And whilst the side Nando Land sent out in 2007 was heroic, the team who repeated their feats might just be the most talented, exciting and greatest team Portugal has ever put together. A young side who could be a hell of a treat when things kick off in just a few months' time, yet owe oh so much to the heroes from 16 years ago. So, let's dig in. Who are this Portuguese team? How did they return to rugby's biggest stage? Which players should we be keeping an eye out for? Spoilers to the back three. And what else should we know ahead of Los Lobos' bow in France later this year? Rugby in Portugal has never followed the traditional path. Much like fellow European qualifiers Italy, Romania and Spain, the sport was brought to Peri-Peri shores in the early 1900s by students who had spent time in England or France, and the game grew quickly from there across Lisbon universities. And it stayed in Lisbon universities, where other nations formed unions, leagues, and usually national sides inside a decade of the sport being played there. In Portugal, rugby remained a pretty much strictly student pastime. Like cheap vodka or optimism and hope for the future, rugby was something you abandoned once you hit graduation. There were 23 years between the sport first arriving in Lisbon and a national union being formed, and that union didn't exactly move quickly, waiting another 9 years before arranging a fixture for the national team they'd promised they'd get round to back, quite a while ago. Throughout the 20th century, rugby remained a pretty popular university sport in Portugal, but once the mortarboard went on, the scrum caps came off. Non-university rugby clubs were sparse, primarily composed of graduates trying to recapture their university glory days, which is normally a desperately tragic thing to see. With the national union run by volunteers in their spare time, Portugal played just a handful of games over the first 25 years, only getting themselves properly set up in the late 50s, establishing a national league that's still going strong to this day and arranging much more regular fixtures. Slowly but surely, Portugal began to compete with all of Europe's non-Six Nation sides, building towards a huge draw with Italy in 1972 before defeating them a year later. Results weren't consistent, but the curve was broadly upwards, at least until this day. The Netherlands slapping them silly and qualifying for the 91 World Cup. The Portuguese Federation instantly recognising things had to change. The union modernised it, revamped its national leagues, invested in facilities, started looking to spread clubs wider across the country, and starting to push the game into schools, rather than waiting until prospective players could binge drink to teach them the game. The impact this had was enormous and instantaneous. Participation numbers in the sport more than doubled in just 3 years, thanks to the union deciding to act more professionally, and about a dozen of the squad that would go on to take them to Rugby Showpiece tournament 14 years down the line would take up the game during that initial 3-year age grade push. However, success can have its strings. A much stronger qualifying campaign for the 95 World Cup saw them reach a first ever game against a Tier 1 nation as they took on Wales for a place in the 1995 Rugby World Cup. And Wales won. 102-11. Nigel Walker scoring 4 of 16 Welsh tries in Lisbon. Still, to this day, the most tries, the most points Cymru have ever scored in a test match, and actually the most recent time Wales won a match. The impact this result had on Portuguese rugby was enormous. Morale dipped, crowd shrunk, and momentum appeared squandered. But just as the national team stared down the barrel of a false dawn, who should arrive but a coach by the name of Professor Thomas Morais? A former player turned dashing academic, Morais was a revolution. The architect of Portugal's decade-plus World 7 Series success, Morais' time with the 15 side was no less revolutionary. He built the team entirely, everything seemingly climaxing in 2004 when he led his team to glory, the Rugby Europe Championship title, and with it, a shot at World Cup qualification. They might be able to make 2007. A draw with Georgia, however, meant that they missed out on the Europe 2 spot on points difference, but would be entered into the repechage, where nobody was to deny Portugal. An enormous 1-point win over Uruguay in Montevideo saw a few players spend a night in the cells to celebrate their win, as the rest packed their bags, knowing they were headed to France. But all that while, little were they to know a fuse had been lit back home. Portugal in 2007 were the first totally amateur team to ever compete at the Rugby World Cup since the sport went professional. They were the pooch that sat underneath the underdog, and whilst rugby fans couldn't help but be adhered to this, within Portugal the impact qualification made was so much greater. Rugby was never going to compete with football, what are you trying? Sure, but suddenly, after Portugal were in the Coupe du Monde, the sports channels started carrying rugby. The number of clubs around increased. More and more schools started to offer rugby within its curriculum. The national team were able to professionalise, start paying their players. The game grew from a student curio to a legitimate sport. Not one that was competing with football, but a legitimate sport nonetheless. And a younger generation was suddenly able to pay attention to it. Modern-day Lobos fullback Nuno Sousa Guedes, best known for pulling this awesome shit in the biggest game of his life last year, says watching the 2007 World Cup on TV made him beg his parents to let him play, go and find a club. To let him play. They went out and found a club. Then, in 2016, he ran out alongside members of the squad who inspired him when he was just 12 years old. Yet Guedes was just the first of what was to come. Whilst Portugal definitely left their mark on the 2007 tournament, the true impact of what they achieved wouldn't be felt until 9 years later, when a Portuguese under-18 side, comprised almost entirely of kids who took up the sport on the back of watching the Uva family on their own basically take on the world, drew with Scotland before going on to win the under-20s European trophy 3 years in a row. Whilst the national team was struggling, relegated to Europe's second division, with clubs and union locked in an endless civil war, a golden generation was simmering, now just hitting the age at which their predecessors would have taken up the sport, inspired instead by their part-time heroes a generation ago. And indeed, it wasn't long before these players started to filter into the senior side. And what a group of players, man. The 2017-18 Portugal under-20s team is possibly up there for Romania's 2005 vintage at one of the strongest Tier 2 age grade sides that's ever been produced, that's ever been. Whilst the last lot to rock up a Rugby World Cup were hard workers who played with passion, the Portugal we're going to be seeing in 2023 are very different. The passion remains, but where it was a teary ballad before, these days it's a Portuguese tango. The team playing with a beauty, ambition and self-expression that even in a tricky group could be so much fun to watch. Because Portugal might have the best back three in Tier 2 rugby outside of the Pacific Islands right now, all led by a man who could become Portuguese rugby's first real superstar, Rafael Storti, a lightning-fast winger who can finish literally anything. Storti first caught the world's eye in 2019, where his 9 tries in 4 games at the Under-20s World Trophy got Portugal into the final, Japan only defeating them by a point, where he scored a try himself. And from there, he never slowed down. Signed by Stade Francais a year later, he went on to spend last year on loan at Béziers in the Pro D2, where he scored 6 tries in his first 4 games before eventually finishing the year with 13 tries in 15 starts and all limbs still attached, which is the first ever time that's happened for a winger in the Pro D2. Storti reminds me of a kind of quicker DTH van der Merwe, a razor-sharp weapon who takes every chance his team can create, the sort of player who can single-handedly make a scoreboard look more respectable. Except he doesn't have to do it single-handedly because he's joined in the back three by the aforementioned skillful bastard Guedes, at this point a kind of versatile veteran of the side. We also have the Pintos, Manuel and Vincent, totally unrelated, not brothers as you may be led to think at first, but they play in a similar style with such exuberance, such pace, they hit the line so perfectly. They're both absolutely fantastic players. And then Storti's real competition for those superstar claims to fame, Rodrigo Marta. I adore watching this guy play, right? Already Portugal's all-time record try scorer at just 23 years of age, Marta has notched up a pretty remarkable 25 tries in 29 caps and scored an equally amazing 17 tries in 19 games for Dax this season just gone, which actually made him the joint top scorer in all of European professional rugby last season just gone. Where Storty is a spark, Marta is more of a technician. His high ball work is genuinely exceptional. He's phenomenal at the high ball. His defence and positioning are sublime, and with the sheer abundance of back free options they have, this spring, Portugal started to move him into the 13 shirt to fit Storty, Guedes and a Pinto or two into the team as well, where he partnered his captain almighty, Thomas Appleton. One of the most effortlessly charismatic men in rugby, and a qualified dentist, Appleton is a guy it's hard not to root for, an instant favourite of anyone who gives them even one node of their attention. A balanced, old-school, all-rounder 12 whose ball carrying is equal to his distribution and leads the defence extremely well. If Portugal are to pull any surprises, expect him to be the glue holding the side together, a leader in all aspects, because Appleton has also been the bridge between that young, exciting new generation and what came before. Having been relegated out of the Rugby Europe Championship down to European Rugby's third division, and knowing change was now necessary, in 2019 Portugal brought in a new coach in the slightly baffled shape of Patrice Lagisquet, a former France international who played in the first ever Rugby World Cup final. Lagisquet went into coaching in the late 90s, eventually taking over at Biarritz Olympique, where he retired, leading them to 3 top 14 titles and 2 European finals. However, after losing a Heineken Cup final by just 2 points, Lagisquet decided he'd had enough. He had a lot of heartbreak, man. A lot of this going through. And he quit. All the excitement, these highs and lows, were a bit much for him, so he gave up on professional coaching of top-flight rugby to become an insurance salesman. And a brief spell as an assistant to that god-awful 2015 French team aside, Lagisquet kept his relationship to rugby strictly upstairs, involved in Biarritz in a purely business capacity. That was until 2019, when Portugal came a-knocking. Lagisquet said his main mission with Portugal, his primary goal, was to make sure the team would never pushovers. Win or lose, nobody will ever have an easy game against them, and this would require a huge mindset shift, and so he invested in youth rather than reprogramming players who've been beaten for years and years. Pick any team from his tenure and at least a third of the group will be 23 and under. I haven't tested on every single game, but every one I tried it was the case. The only area where he hasn't raided Lisbon's cribs being the front row. In order to build the tough exterior mindset, Lagisquet put huge emphasis on the scrum and set piece, through niggle and nasty technique though, not raw strength. Led by legend Francisco Fernandez, Lagisquet selected 3 front rowers over 34 in his team to play the USA in that final decider last year, who alongside scrum half Samuel Marquez dragged the team's average age up 3 whole years on their own. Portugal were quickly promoted back to where they belong after Lagisquet came in, and in 2020 were able to refine solid shape, winning their first 2 games, including a super significant victory over Romania, which gave them scope to start to really build. The following year, Portugal climbed into the top 3, before, in 2022, really laying their marker down. After letting their opening game against Romania slip away from them in the final few minutes, Portugal knew they had it all to do were they to achieve Lagisquet's vision of qualifying for a second Rugby World Cup as they headed to Tbilisi. The Georgian juggernaut had won every single game they played in the Rugby Europe Championship since 2015. 7 years without a loss, and last failed to win at home in the competition all the way back in 2009. Yet Portugal were undeterred, knowing this could be crucial to them getting to their dream of a World Cup. Still being in touch come the second half may have been enough proof that Portugal were no pushover a year or two earlier. But gifted an opportunity through their belligerence, Portugal proceeds to show exactly what they're all about. After getting a nudge on the Georgian pack in a maul, Portugal proceeded to repeatedly shift the point of focus. One phase, it's a prop smashing up on the open side. Next, Pinto's flashing back blindside, drawing Georgian defenders, before the real coup de grace. Geronimo Portela at 10 is a really skillful box of tricks. He's so fun to watch. Keep a real eye on him. But this is particularly glorious. His casual body language as he drifts across the boot, just disinterested, before calling it out and casually dropping it on the toe. Tabitsadze is able to get across for Georgia, but he's still adjusting and backtracking, allowing the magnificent Marta to advance onto the ball and finish brilliantly before Marquez nails the touchline conversion to bring Portugal level. A few minutes later, Los Lobos get back downfield and score again, putting themselves 7 points ahead. And whilst the Lelos were able to get downfield and level up, Portela and Marquez's sublime game management saw them run the clock down and secure a draw with Georgia that rather fittingly got them into a repechage, one where they would play the USA, knowing a win or a draw would get them ahead. And a last-minute penalty meant that this time, when it all finished level, they would be the ones who go through on points difference. Ready to face Australia, fellow amazing back three havers Fiji, Georgia once again, and seeking revenge for what they did all the way back in 1994, Wales. Over the last 3 years, Portugal have pulled off some pretty incredible results. The last second draw to that USA may be the headline, but this beat against Japan came close to being the biggest scalp. Portugal looking dead set for a winning try here, only to chuck the ball to Japan fullback Rihei Yamanaka instead, resulting in a 14-point turnaround that cost them the game when it could have been theirs. But that draw with Georgia away in the same year, almost the exact same Georgian 15 beat Italy and Wales, like Portugal are going to do at this World Cup, perhaps best demonstrates what they're capable of. It's a weird group where Australia may be a bridge too far, but their rematch with Georgia should be a real standout. And that game against Fiji, man, I've got it circled on my calendar already, just as I wouldn't be taking the game for granted if I were Wales. Shit. However, as much credit as the young crowd, Appleton, the front row, and Lagisquet himself deserve, it wouldn't be right to discuss Portugal's recent run of results without shining a spotlight on one bald head. Because the one thing every last one of those remarkable results has in common is an outstanding performance from scrum half Samuel Marquez, a player who asks and answers the question, what if Greg Laidlaw secretly wished he was Jason Statham? A Laidlaw, Pienaar, Para type steadying hand at 9 that's sort of gone out of fashion these days. At 34, Marquez has been a vital foil for their much younger, more enthusiastic backline. Marquez won his first cap for Portugal all the way back in 2012, but then for 8 whole years found themselves lost in the French league wilderness, out of favour, unavailable, or forced to turn down call-ups to secure pro contracts with the likes of Toulouse and Brive, where he played for years. It's only now, in the twilight of his career, that an older, wiser Marquez has finally got to fulfil his test match dreams and do his country proud in the way he dreamt during that 8-year absence. For most players, a kick to put your nation into the Rugby World Cup for just the second time ever might seem like pressure. For Marquez, it was a dream come true. And if there was anybody in the history of the Portuguese game who'd want to take it, I scarcely hesitate to say it was him. Under Lagisquet, Portugal have become a free-spirited, attacking, open rugby team who are a thrill to watch. But in Marquez, they have a second weapon, a secret sauce that makes this team work. A sensible bloke in his mid-30s to whom it all means so much more. Since his return to the national fold in 2020, Marquez has averaged 12 points a game and a 90% success rate from the tee. But a lifetime in the top 14 and now Pro D2 has honed his game management into a fine old craft. At 9, this tactically adept is not something many Tier 2 nations can call on, but Marquez's vision, kicking and sublime decision-making has made him invaluable to Portugal's climb from relegation to Rugby World Cup 2023. The Portuguese team of 2007 added so much value to that competition. They gave Italy an amazing fright, pushed them right to the last 10 minutes. This gloriously constructed try finished by David Panavala, putting them right back in it. They nabbed a losing bonus point against Romania and frustrated Scotland in the kind of way that literally only every opponent Scotland played in the mid-noughties could. But their true legacy wasn't any of the iconic sing-songs or heroic tries. It was this Portuguese team. A bunch of youngsters that they inspired to take up the game, who are now leading their nation into a potential golden age and back to the biggest stage of all. And now that fresh team have the chance to do exactly the same and create some moments that may stand as iconic for generations to come. Thank you for watching that, and apologies to any Portuguese names or places or anything else I mispronounced, including Samuel Marks. Look, I'm learning, and hopefully by the World Cup it'll be alright. That was a huge labour of love. I really enjoyed putting that together. I think we both did.
Very passionate about that team.
Yeah.
And I want to win the World Cup, and now so do you.
And the thing is, they're going to. Yeah. Please join us soon for Scotland, who will be coming very soon. Going to continue rattling through all of them. This puts us officially at the halfway in terms of the being up. We're beyond halfway in terms of where we are getting through them. It's been a lot of bloody work, but we'll see you soon for more of those. If someone's around the channel, please dot around, have a look, and I'll see you very soon for more
rugby.
What the man said.
Esta nova geração de lobos